Welcome to another Texas in Conversation. In this interview, we'll be speaking with Chris Jellison, Vice President of Pharmacy at Parkview Health, to discuss pharmacy inventory management. As drugs continue to be a costly and complex asset to manage, the importance of integrating pharmaceuticals into your supply chain operations is at an all-time high. However, for most health systems and hospitals, there is a wall up between supply chain and the pharmacy. In this conversation, we'll examine what an integrated approach to pharmacy inventory management looks like and what benefits can be achieved by taking control of your pharmacy supply chain. So thanks for joining me today, Chris. And before we dive into our conversation about pharmacy inventory management, can you just take a few minutes and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure thing. So, as you said, I'm Chris Jellison, Vice President of Pharmacy for Parkview Health. We're a 9 to 11 hospital health system in Northeast Indiana with a number of integrated physician practices as well. I've been with Parkview for quite a while, a little bit over 40 years. I started as a pharmacy technician, worked my way through pharmacy school, kind of cut my teeth in a surgical ICU pharmacy. And from there went into leadership, have had many different roles in leadership. My background has primarily been operations, and was director, corporate director, vice president. All of those, those titles are all very similar. Since about the 2015 or so. And in that role now, I am more responsible for strategy than ever before, more responsible for the big picture, and I think that's where this intersection between supply chain and pharmacy became obvious.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for that. And as we know, the rising drug prices to poor inventory management, the pharmaceutical supply chain operations are constantly facing challenges growing daily. Can you talk just a little bit about Parkview's pharmacy and describe some of the challenges that the supply chain and you have experienced?
Sure. We do have a fairly rudimentary inventory management system, and it doesn't give us quite the visibility that we need. The updating of pricing in the system is challenging. Being able to see across the enterprise in one click is challenging. And then the other challenge is really all of the shortage management, the need to be able to interface with multiple vendors for the same product, to be able to quickly switch products when we need to. A lot of it's manual, and the piece that's manual that's particularly challenging is keeping an average price updated. That's probably our biggest challenge, is how do we carry the proper costing information in our system so that we're properly representing expense and more easily track any revenue to expense variances.
Gotcha. So I'm sure just like me and many people watching this interview, we're nodding our heads in agreement right now because they're facing probably some of the same challenges in their hospital pharmacies. And so I know we'd all like to hear your answer to my next question. How are you overcoming some of these hurdles at Parkview?
Yeah, well, probably the biggest, I don't want to say smack in the face, but it was a bit of an eye opener, was an internal audit that we did, and found that there was a number of invoices that we were paying that didn't have a good three-way match. We didn't find any invoices that shouldn't have been paid, but it certainly pointed out a very a significant problem with control.
Right.
And so, we went out, looked around, tried to find a good ERP solution for pharmacy that would do ERP and either do ERP and integrate with our inventory management system, or had an inventory management system with it. Looked, quite honestly, spent about 3 or 4 months looking around, and at the same time, Texas was working with a hospital to see if a pharmacy system was going to be possible. And at the end of the day, it turns out that the solution was already in-house, and that we needed to investigate this Texas product and see if it was going to meet pharmacy's needs.
Right. So tell me a little bit about the value that a strong technology partner such as Texas brings into your integrated approach to pharmacy supply chain inventory management?
Sure. So, as folks know, Texas very reputable in the supply chain arena. Hospital med surg supply chain, number of big customers, knows supply chain very well, and our people have been very consider the relationship with Texas to be a strategic partnership for Parkview Health. And the nice thing that Texas brings specifically to Parkview is a confidence in the system, right? It's not something where I have to go to my leadership or I have to go to my management teams and sell them on it, because we're already sold on it. We see how it works. Pharmacies integrate with med surg supply. We need med surg supplies to run our pharmacy, and so we're a customer of our supply chain.
Right.
And so there's a competency that's there already, and that really gives us a lot of kind of comfort, and but also knowledge that where our med surg folks or our supply chain folks have had challenges with the supply chain technology, it's a very collaborative relationship between Parkview and Texas already. And so that gave us the confidence also that this would be a very collaborative relationship. At the end of the day, we're really looking forward to having subject matter experts within the health system already as we kind of develop this. I mean, it's very, very pharmacy specific module. We're more heavily regulated, I think, than most supply chains are. Right. And therefore, there's some things that are unique about pharmacy, but there's some things that aren't necessarily unique about pharmacy. And so we already have in-house subject matter experts that understand the Texas technology and can really make this a very smooth transition for us.
And just adopting the core principles across the board is really important.
Absolutely. And they're in some ways they're translators for us too. Right. Pharmacy and our own individual organization, we've got our language, right? And supply chain has its language. Right. And our supply chain folks that are helping us with this process sit at the table and go, oh, when you say this, they say that.
Right. Kind of meet them with that translation.
Absolutely. And that just makes the collaboration that much easier and quicker.
Right. So that's great. So supply chain technology, it provides solutions, such as things like global inventory visibility. We talk about that a little bit. Demand planning are big words right now. Yeah. So in what ways has your pharmacy supply chain either benefited, or do you see a benefit from these features going forward?
Yeah, well, the global transparency I think that'll be a big piece for us. That will allow, I don't think we have a lot of obsolescence, but we work really hard to make sure we don't have a lot of obsolescence. And so this global visibility is going to make that easier, which should free up some time to focus on higher level problems, for example. Demand planning, we're really looking forward to having an inventory that we know is the right size. Right. Hospitals everywhere, even your small hospitals are investing, at least six-figure inventories, probably seven and multi-seven figure inventories in your larger hospitals. And so that being an asset that we're entrusted with, it's important that we get that number right. And I think that's where demand planning is really going to come into play for us. Obviously there's a certain amount of history that has to be established, and we've done a lot of work to use some of the data from our earlier attempts at an inventory management system to help inform that demand planning. But we're going to go into it with the confidence that, you've got this where science meets art piece in demand planning. And I think having the right data to inform that science piece is really going to be important for us.
Right. And especially, we've seen over the decades, especially in supply chain, and I'm sure pharmacy is the same way, that things are only going to get more costly. So as things go up, we really need to bring our technology, into focus to where we can just, do everything that we can to wrap our hands around controlling those costs.
Exactly. Yeah. And it goes to the point I made earlier with shortage management. And shortage management's been with us for at least a decade now, right? So all indications are it's just the nature of pharmaceutical supply chains. It's the nature of global supply chains, right? Everything's just in time. You get a little interruption in an active ingredient plant somewhere, it's going to ripple through the supply chain for 18 months before everything fully recovers. And so being able to see it, being able to know where it's at, to know where it costs is just going to be so much more important in helping us manage that asset.
How do you see technology benefiting you, or how has it benefited you in the case of a global pandemic like this past year that we went through?
Yeah, well, yeah, that was exactly it. So there were occasionally opportunities would come up where there was a bulk purchase that we could make, right? And we could bring that in, but I needed to be able to keep my eye on it for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, one, it's a pandemic. So people, there was risk that people behave badly in pandemics, and there's the possibility, God forbid, it would ever happen to us, but we've got to control for the possibility of shrinkage, right? And so I want to see it. I need to be able to see it. And I need my other hospitals to be able to see this excess inventory as well, because we're kind of all managing to that inventory. We need to know what's available because we need to be able to quickly work with our providers if we are going to get into a situation where we've got a shortage that we can't manage and we've got to move into alternatives. And
so that strong technology is just
yes, absolutely is very important.
Great. So lastly, Chris, I'd like for you to just take a few minutes and just share any advice that you may have that other healthcare leaders who may be hesitating or second guessing the benefits of integrating their pharmaceuticals into their supply chain. What kind of key takeaways could you give them?
It wasn't obvious to me until a few years ago. I was working on a presentation that was just kind of like, well, let's describe for this group really what the pharmacy is all about, right? And so I'm mapping everything out, drawing this diagram, and I ended up with the inventory cycle and the distribution cycle. They're really two different pieces of a pharmacy operation, but they come together at a single point. They come together at the point where somebody reaches out to touch that inventory to give it to a patient, right? That's a whole different cycle now. But so the first cycle, though, at the end of the day, is really just a supply chain cycle, right? It's what's your min max, what's your suggested order? You order it, you bring it in, you've got it, it goes on the shelf. How much does it cost? You decrement that inventory, you order some more. So there isn't really anything in the pharmacy supply chain piece that's unique to pharmacy. There's a regulatory burden there that's unique to pharmacy, but the supply chain piece itself is supply chain activity. And so it's not like we partner with our supply chain, right? It's not one reports to the other. And even if it was in our culture, we know that we're all in this boat together. We're all rowing in the same direction. We all have the same incentives. We all have the same measures of success. We're all invested in each other's success. And so I don't think that the barriers that maybe were there politically years ago in most organizations are still there, because if you're not in a situation where you've got that kind of culture, you're probably working on even more foundational stuff at this time.
Right. Definitely.
You got some foundational problems you got to deal with before this kind of stuff is going to rise to the level.
Yeah, before you can get to that point.
Exactly. And so I'm fortunate in my position to be, really, really close with the vice president of supply chain, and we collaborate a lot. It's a lot of, what's a drug and what's not a drug kind of conversations that we've had forever. So we're already somewhat integrated with each other, just the nature of the relationship within the health system. And I think once you get over that, I don't know what it is, political posturing, the territoriality of it all. Once you get past that, it's really clear that there are synergies between supply chain and pharmacy, particularly with respect to inventory control, that you really want to leverage if you're serious about stewardship.
Yes, one of the things that I like to speak to is just being able to tear down those silos. A lot of organizations work in silos, but as to your point exactly, we're all going in the same direction, and that's patient care and driving down costs and just those same basic fundamentals that we're trying to drive through. So the faster that we can tear down these walls and these silos, the more beneficial and successful that we'll all be.
Correct. And you're not giving up your whole pharmacy to some piece of software. You never had one piece of software running your pharmacy. There's a lot of components to it. It doesn't make sense to not maximize the efficiency of a particular component of your operation simply because you're worried about the politics of it.
Well, definitely. So, Chris, I can't thank you enough just for your insights today and just your advice and just the things that you've gleaned over your experience and over your career. This has been very educational for our Texas in Conversation interview. And I'd also like to thank our viewers. If you need support with integrating a pharmacy supply chain within your healthcare organization, Texas is here to help. At the end of this video, you have the option to speak to one of our hospital supply chain experts, or access our ebook on the definitive guide to hospital pharmacy inventory management best practices. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but it's very informational for you guys, and you can access it at the end of this video. So again, thank you so much, Chris Jellison, VP of Pharmacy at Parkview, and thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.